Hey there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel for this brand new video. This time we'll talk about getting started with logging in Asp.NET Core with Serilog, so a third-party logging provider. Now on the Code Wrinkles channel we already have some videos on how to get started with Asp.NET Core logging, how to really configure logging really in depth. And now it's time to actually move one step further and look into a third-party logging provider, which is very popular, so that we can get accustomed with how we might use logging in real projects. Because in most of the real projects that we write, we use some third-party logging providers because we want to log to a log file, for instance, or we want to log to some logging aggregation system. And this is not provided by default in the logging infrastructure of Asp.NET Core. As we have seen, in there we can just log to the console, we can log to the event viewer, we can log to debug, but we cannot log to a file, or we cannot log to another external system. So let's get started and see exactly how we can use Serilog, a third-party logging provider, to actually get our logging going. So before we actually do anything, there is one important thing that we would need to do, and this is we need to install some dependencies, because as we want to use a library, we'll of course need to install the needed components. And let me also walk you through this. So here we have our dependencies, so let's go to manage NuGet packages. One thing that I would like to make sure is that, well, to see exactly what version of Asp.NET Core we currently have. But I guess it's .NET 5 and something, so it's not the new one, the .NET 6. Now let's go here in Browse. Let me also switch to NuGet. And the first package that we need to install is, of course, Serilog. Now, if we search for Serilog, there is one important thing to take in consideration, and that's why actually we just talk about using Serilog right now in an Asp.NET Core project. Because we have this Serilog library, which is the general purpose Serilog logging library, which means that you can use this to, for instance, log also in non.NET Core projects, like maybe .NET Framework, WPF, Xamarin, and so on. So you can use that one. But we have then also the option to use Serilog.asp.NET Core. And you see that we have this library. And when we install this package, actually the general purpose package Serilog will also automatically be installed. So that's why if you are using Asp.NET Core, you just have to install this one, and then you should be able to actually work with Serilog. So let's install this one. I guess it would take just a few seconds, and then everything should be fine. Now, as the next thing that we would have to take into consideration is, well, we need to also provide, let's accept this. Okay, so now this should be also installed. Now, the next thing that we would have to think about is, as said, and if you didn't watch the first video on logging in Asp.NET Core, I strongly encourage you to do that. You can find the link in the description of this video here below, or you can find it here somewhere on a card floating on the screen, probably, or in the corner right up. So you can just pause this one and go to the other and take a look, because there we really discuss the exact, or how the logging infrastructure looks like in Asp.NET Core, and what actually a logging provider is. And we also have talked about the fact that we actually need also destinations for our logs. So we log something, but we need to send them somewhere. And we usually call this type of destinations sinks. So this means that if you want to get started with Serilog, you can install this package and you can really use it, but you don't send the logs anywhere. You just log to an abstraction and that's it. And for that one, we just need to create, or to also install some sinks for Serilog. And in this case, we would actually need two such sinks. One for logging to a file and one for logging to console, because the Serilog logging to console is a little bit fancier than the standard Asp.NET Core one. So let's then here just search for Serilog. And then we say that we want sinks, and then we want console. And we see that we find this library Serilog sinks console. So that's that's the library that we actually want. So let's also install this one. Okay, let's accept this. Should be fine, I guess. Okay, and now we also want to log to a file. This is the most exciting part of this video. So we have sinks, but then we want file. And you see that we have this Serilog sinks file. And let's also install this one. Okay, so everything should be fine right now. If we look here under packages, we see this Serilog Asp.NET Core, which is the logging package for Asp.NET Core by Serilog. Then we have Serilog Sinks console and Serilog Sinks file. So from this point of view, we should be good to go, so no problem there. Now, the second step that we actually need to perform in order to configure Serilog or to configure our Asp.NET Core application to use Serilog, we then need to do some tweaks. And these tweaks we usually do here in this Program.cs file. Now, in this Program.cs file, actually we see that we have this a web builder, this configure web host defaults, which is actually the default startup. And let's do the following thing. Let's put this here. Let's also have and we use a dot. And Serilog provides us with an extension method, use Serilog. And of course, I guess we would also need to import Serilog for that, and that should be fine. But of course, here we need to specify some configuration. And the way to do is we can here use a lambda, is how this is the easiest way to configure Serilog. And what we have, we get a hosting context, which is actually the Asp.NET Core hosting or information about the Asp.NET Core hosting. And then we have the logger configuration that we can actually use. And we said that we want to do this a lambda. So let's do it. It should be like that. And here, for instance, we can specify, and I'll explain just in a minute why we do this. So we can have here logger configuration, and here, I guess I have a typo here. So yeah, it's double G, not double O. So once again, logger configuration. Okay, and then we have this read from. You see that we already have kind of like this hint in Visual Studio 2022. So let's use that. And here, what does this actually do? So we say here that for the logger configuration, read from, and we have to provide a configuration file from which we should read the Serilog configurations. And we'll go to this just in 1 minute. But right now, I just want to make sure that we fully understand what's actually the purpose of this lambda here. So you know that we have this appsettings.json file. Now, when an Asp.NET Core application actually is starting up, one thing that happens is that it actually creates or reads configurations from different sources. It reads configurations from environment variable, for instance, but it also defaults to reading a configuration from this appsettings.json file, and of course also the corresponding appsettings.development.json or other type of app settings environment specific app settings file. So this happens all by default. Now, what we would like to do probably is that we would add the Serilog configuration exactly in the same file, so in this appsettings.json. So in that case, we just specify here to Serilog, when it comes to the configuration for the Serilog logging that we want to have in our application, just look into the hosting context and into the configuration that you have there. Because once we define our settings here in appsettings.json for Serilog, then that would be, or those configurations will also be present in the hosting context configuration. And actually, if we go one step further, this configuration on the hosting context is nothing else than this iConfiguration property that we have here in the startup class. So it's exactly the same, but due to different reasons, when configuring Serilog, we should do it here. And this means that we are now done with the setting up Serilog, at least from this point of view of adding Serilog to Asp.NET Core. And that's actually fairly it for the code itself that we will need to write. Because other than that, as we will see, we just need to configure in appsettings.json how exactly Serilog should work. And then all the logging that we already have in place will work out of the box, because this is the power of logging to an abstraction, which in this case is the iLogger. So let's take just a moment here to go to the app settings file and start writing our Serilog configuration. Now, in order to do that, we need an object, of course, which is called Serilog. And this should be a regular object, I guess. Now, in this Serilog object, one first thing that we can configure is the minimum level. So it should be something like that. And this minimum level also is an object. And here we can actually specify things that were similar what we had here in the log level in the default logging configuration. So in this case, we can see, for instance, that, okay, hey, we want a default level, and let our default level be information. But in addition to this default level, we just want to override this in some cases. Now in Serilog, we can do this using this overrides property. And yeah, let's make this also a regular JSON property. And for instance, here we can say for override, we can specify the different logger names, just like we did actually previously. And we have explained how this actually works here, also with these wildcards and so on. So please then refer to the other video if you are not fully aware on how this works here with the naming of the loggers and how we use them here in our configuration files. So here we have the first one. Let's have Microsoft. And for Microsoft, let's say that we want to have the default level to be warning. And then let's maybe say that for, sorry, something went wrong here. Of course, we had the comma at the wrong place. And then we can say, for instance, that for Microsoft.hosting.lifetime, which is the name of the logger that we also used in the other configuration, for this one we also want warning. So we don't want Serilog to log information from these loggers. So this is how we actually use this override. Good. So let's, I guess we are now done with our minimum level. So we have the default information. So all the information that we log should be logged by Serilog, but the information that is logged by Microsoft or by Microsoft Hosting Lifetime shouldn't be logged by Serilog. That's essentially what we specify here in the Serilog minimum level configuration. Now, going one step further, we need to also specify to Serilog which things do we actually want to use. And in order to do that, we have to specify a using property. Actually, this should be an array. So we would have here an array of strings. And here we need to specify the things that we want Serilog to use. And of course, these things we already have installed via the NuGet package manager. So the first one would be Serilog.things.console. And then we would have another one, which would be Serilog, but we also have to type it correctly. So Serilog.things.file. Cool. So now we should be good to go. And we have this using. So right now Serilog does know exactly what things it should use. Of course, those things should be installed. It goes without saying. Now, the next thing that we can specify is actually some targets to write to and configure how different things should be written. And for those targets, actually, we can specify all the things and configure each thing separately. So in a very, very granular way. And for that one, we have this property, which is write to. And this property actually is also an array. So let's have it here. Let me check. Okay, we should be good to go. Now, for this one, we then need to specify separate objects for each thing that we have. So the first one that we have, it has the name console. So right now it knows that it should write to the console. Then we can go one step further and specify our settings for the file. So for this, we just need another object here. And here we would also define more properties. So we would have like name, and let's call this file. But then what we'll also have here is args. So we can specify some arguments. And by the way, regarding the properties or the JSON configuration that is supported or what you can configure, these are all information that you can look up on the Serilog documentation. And I cannot emphasize how important that is when you want to really log with Serilog. But for that matter, with any third-party logging provider, when it comes to how to configure your loggers, go to the documentation and look exactly into how you can configure those and what properties do you have, because these are things that you kind of really won't remember in your memory. So you'll use them, but in 2 weeks you'll forget them. So the documentation is very, very important in this case. So for arguments, we can specify, actually this is another object, and here we can specify, for instance, a path for the file where the log file should be created. And in our case, the path to the file should be the root of where our application is, then the bin folder, and let's then here log.txt. Okay, and then we have this another property which would be important, which is the rolling interval. And the rolling interval could be, for instance, day, but you could have month or week or whatever actually you would like, or whatever is supported by Serilog actually. So just look into the documentation. But what's actually the main idea about this? So the main idea with this rolling interval is that it actually defines, okay, when should we then just go over to a new log file? Because in real applications, your log files will get fairly big. And for instance, you could say, or what we have specified here is that each day, please create me a new log file. But you can specify, for instance, to create for you a new log file every hour, or I don't know, every 2 days if you don't have that many logs. So the idea is that this rolling interval specifies exactly when a new log file should be created. And that's actually it. Good. And right now we actually have a very, very basic Serilog configuration. And as said, we have installed the packages. We have here in our program file just added this use Serilog, and we said that Serilog should read the configuration from the iConfiguration in the hosting context, which is essentially the exactly same configuration that you have in your startup. And then actually what we have done is we have configured Serilog via JSON in the appsettings.json. So without anything else, when we run our application right now, we should see our logs in the console, but we will see that those are Serilog logs because they are much fancier. And we should also have a log file for the logs that our application generates. So let us just run the application. Already by running it, there should be some logs happening, but let's see. So first of all, this is the console. And you see that this logging in the console is much nicer in a certain way, or at least different, let's say different, than what we have in the standard logging configuration when we don't use Serilog. So we can already see that Serilog is working. Now let's also make a call to the API, and the API is on the other screen. I won't show it because it's really not important in this case. But we see that we have here all the logs that we have generated, because we have logs, or we write logs in our controllers, and there we actually also throw some or log some exception, and we also log a warning, but we also have logs in our service which actually retrieves weather forecasts. So we can already see that Serilog is working perfectly here in our console. Now let's close this up, and let's actually go here and open this open folder in File Explorer. So let me go here, and if we go here in our bin, we see that we have this log file which has the date of today. This was generated by Serilog, so let's open it. And you see that it would open it in Notepad, and we have all the logs that we actually have in the console, we also have in this file. So it's exactly the same. And this is how actually you see that how easy it is actually to get started with Serilog. So as a summary and key takeaways, once again, it's very important to understand this concept about logging providers, because Serilog is a third-party logging provider. And then when it comes to logging, you also have to specify some destinations on where you actually want to send those logs. And these destinations are generally called sinks. So that's why if you want to use Serilog in your application, you would have to install the Serilog Asp.NetCore package, but then also install the packages for the sinks that you want to use. In our case, we have installed a sink for the console, and we have installed a sink for the file, which was great. Then the second thing that we need to do is to go here in our program file and just let Serilog know that it should actually read the configuration from the hosting context configuration, which is essentially the same configuration that we have also in the startup class. And then the last step, which is actually not writing code, but just JSON specification about how things should work, we have configured here Serilog in our appsettings.json file, and Serilog then logged to the specified things according to the settings that we have specified here in the Serilog logging configuration. So that's mostly it for how to get started with Serilog in Asp.NET Core. If you enjoyed this video, then please feel free to share it with your peers, with your colleagues. They might also find it useful. And if you didn't subscribe to this channel, please subscribe, because there will be more interesting content coming your way these coming days and weeks and months. We try to publish here videos at least twice a week. We also do a lot of live coding sessions, so live streaming, so you can then just jump in and ask your questions, and we'll have a chat. So please subscribe if you didn't do this already. Hit the thumbs up, of course, that would also be awesome if you could do that. And if you have questions, if you have ideas, if you just want to say something, don't be shy and use the comments of this video. I am always more than happy to get a discussion going and actually have a chat with you. Remember, here it's about more being a community on Code Wrinkles. So I really emphasize this, at least for myself, that I really want to get in touch. And whenever you have a question or have something to say, I'm always up for a discussion. This being said, thank you very much for watching and standing by. And until the next time, I wish you the very best.